picking up on where we were last time, and that's the idea of everything being connected. So when we talk about Allah, talk about the divine God, then we're not talking about something separate. And we're kind of trying to get to this idea of, well, we know that we are not Allah, but we're also can't be completely separate from Allah. Is there any other thoughts that we want to bring up? Kasim, you were mentioning something earlier that was quite interesting, possibly
Um,
controversial. We'll see.
like I was talking about earlier in our break um that God is the way we look at God is very because we look at the world in a physical sense, and we want to define stuff through objects, and the way we also want to put God in a box where we can understand and interpret the idea of what God is. But maybe God is undefinable, of course, but it's undefinable in the sense that um the one it could be, let's say, what we can say, um because we like to talk about Big Bang a lot, and everybody's like, there was nothing before Big Bang, and God created something out of nothingness, as God was standing outside and snapped the fingers, and something existed out of nothingness. And what is separating God from that nothingness? Like that's what I think about, you know, like like if there was nothingness, God is somewhere, and isn't God that nothingness?
Yeah, yeah,
Isn't God nothingness and somethingness? Isn't God all dimensions, time, um, whatever is connecting multi-universe or whatever we want to think about, you know, and whatever operates within us that we view the world through our eyes. Um, that is also fascinating because we are experiencing universe from a separate, like we see it as if we are separate, and that's another fascinating layer of the whole thing. And yeah, you know, I think of God as a paper, and the universe as the writing or the drawing on it.
they're not necessarily separate,
Yeah, they're not necessarily separate.
and almost as if when you put the pen or the pencil on the paper, they become almost like the one at that point where they merge. So it's interesting what you're saying. I was going to discuss one thing about, and it goes into this idea of, definitions. And maybe the problem is that, we're trying to define something that shouldn't be defined, and so it's defeating the whole purpose of trying to talk about who is God, is defeating the whole purpose. And there's this idea of negative theology, where you are not describing what God is or what God has, but the only way to approach God is to say what he is not. And keep doing that and doing that and doing that. So God is not a man. God is not an animal. God is not a thing. That the only way is through negatives. Because eventually, when you negate everything, you come to this silence. There's nothingness. There's void. And I'm sure this is also linked with certain philosophies as well. And I want to go back to Meister Eckhart. I think he also discusses this. There's some that mention about the voids, nothingness as being, again, the ground of all being. And it can relate to the idea in the Quran about Surah Ikhlas. In the very last verse, that there is nothing comparable to him. And I think that gets overlooked sometimes when Muslims talk about God, they always talk about oneness. And that is important, obviously, because that's the one thing that you have to have as your principle. But going a little bit beyond that, when you're defining something, it's always set about on the background of comparing it with something else. This can here, no logo, so it's not an advertisement, is here, okay? So the can has got a particular shape that's different from other things, a particular height that's different from other things, but it's only through comparison that I can know and define this as being a can. So it takes definition, but definition involves comparison. So when you're saying that there's nothing compared to God, then how do you describe what is by definition indescribable? The only way you can approach God is maybe through that negative theology of God is not. We wouldn't talk about maybe the attributes. We'll say, oh, but God is merciful. God is powerful. But are the attributes actually talking about God? Are the attributes of Allah and the essence of Allah the same thing? Or are they different?
If you can understand
Sorry?
God, if you can understand God, how can he be God?
Exactly. So it's like, so even saying stuff like, oh, Allah's merciful. But is it? Or is it the case of, again, whatever the Quran presents, Allah in this um, wording, is not that that's actually talking about Allah, it's talking about the creation or the relation of the creation with Allah. Mercy, power, him being the one that provides risk. It's actually talking about creation and Allah's relation with that creation, but it's not Allah. Allah still that that thing that's kind of there and not there, beyond and immanent, being and not being, everything and nothing at the same time.
Present, still absent.
Yeah, it's like
You
present.
can see him still, he's
Yeah,
unseeable.
so even saying that the attributes are just, for me, not talking about Allah, they're talking about the interplay of the creation with Allah. Ultimately, Allah is one, but in terms of who or what Allah is, I think it just takes a matter of knowing what God is not. And I think that's important to know because then it stops you falling into shirk as well. Because if you can make that line that Allah will never be, a human being, then that stops that shirk.
There is something said by, I don't know who said it, but it's super interesting. He said, like, if you try to picture God, you will go astray. Like
Mm,
you will be sinful. You won't be on the right path because our whole thought process works on comparison,
yeah.
black and white, dark or light, whatever. So Allah is beyond comparison, so as heaven, so as hell, so as many other things that He has created, which are far, far beyond from our imagination or anything we have ever seen. And Allah Himself is beyond comparison. So you can never get to Him, like how He looks versus physical form or whatever. But if you want to find Allah, you have to find Him through His creations.
Mhm.
And you look at the world, you would understand that this is not possible without a supreme being. So when you look at his creation, when you look at the sky, and even in Quran, Allah says like, those of you who ask for signs haven't been shown you enough. So there are signs which
Mm.
takes you to Allah.
Yeah, I think it was that point of, if you can't know Allah, then how do you know He exists? But it's through the creation that you know that something exists. But it's not a bit strange that you know that something exists, but you can never define what that thing is. It's very frustrating. You want to
But
know, you want to grasp onto something, but it's almost Islam says, no, you can't. You're not allowed. Like, what do you grasp onto if you can't see, describe, know Allah? What do you
but
hold?
I feel like personally this is it's for me it was never a test of like in the beginning I was like trying to understand and find Allah myself, and I was like going through science and all these things. But then I understood this is not a test of science. This is a test of belief, of faith. And Allah has created this amazing test where He has kept everything in a way science applies, reproduction is required, and everything comes from something. And the only question is, would you believe there is someone who is not limited to these things? There's only one who doesn't need all these laws of
Mm,
physics or anything. And our only test is to get to that yes, there is someone beyond all these.
mm,
And I think this is the purpose of our life, to acknowledge before we die that yes, we acknowledge by seeing everything, yet still we say, you're the one. Without even seeing you, we accept you,
mm,
that you have created us. So for me, it's like not super difficult for any human being. The test, Allah says in Quran, He doesn't burden a soul beyond its capacity. So this test itself is not something that is like, we can't make it to Allah. It's very easy to make it to Allah. And Allah wants us to make it to Him as well. So you walk towards Him, He'll run towards you.
mm. Yeah. Any thoughts, Qasim?
I think it's I agree with what Hamza said about faith and obviously belief as well. And and I used to be very against the idea of belief, but I think when you believe in the things you hear from outside, I still think that's wrong. But I think when you believe from the things when you hear from the inside, from the deepest part of your soul, and that's the right way to go, you know? And I think only when a person is very you can say in a meditative state or starts to live life on a very subtle level, like he starts to observe the subtleties of existence, only then he can hear his own voice, which has been kind of shut down by society. And and you have to have a lot of faith in that voice and live your life according to that voice. And and that is the voice of God. And I think it speaks to everybody. It speaks to everybody, and we might not know what to do. We might not know what is all the answers to life. If we'll just listen to that voice and just live our lives having 100% faith in each and everything, accept all of existence, and and have faith in people, yourself, your life, everything. And only then, I think that that's the only solution or salvation that we have, because we can never answer and solve any problems, or especially answer any of these questions.
Is it
Uh,
possible that, sorry, Hamza.
I just wanted to add something to what Qasim was saying, very short. I heard at some points, some people used to come to Prophet Muhammad SAW and ask them, like, between these two things, what decision should I take? And he used to tell them, take a decision. Wallahu alam, but this is what I've heard. He used to tell them, take a decision, take a fatwa from your heart. So this is something which is like your heart it has two jobs, like it pumps the blood in your body, but it also has another job, that your heart gives like a fatwa to everything, that this is haq or not. It's like only yes or no to everything. And when you have to make a decision, if your heart is telling you, giving you a fatwa, they say it's coming from directly from Allah, that what should be done here. But it's super challenging for us to differentiate this heart and mind thing, that is it my heart or is it my mind or my desire or whatever is influencing it. But yeah, so in a simple words, like our hearts are giving fatwas, or maybe this is directly Allah telling us what's the right thing to do. So within us, Allah is telling us what to do. Like it's built in into our software itself. Allah tells us the right thing to do. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Like we have installed these two wires inside you of right and wrong.
Mm.
Yeah.
As you were saying, now we have, and each of us have, if we attain to the idea that there's something beyond material existence and the idea of God or the divine or the Almighty. But do two people ever have the same experience of God? How do I know what I'm thinking, what I'm experiencing is the same as the person next to me in the mosque? You can't. So maybe it's going back to that idea that it is, that everyone has their own very deep connection with God that is only for them, but it takes that journey inside, again, going inside to find your Lord, almost. And I don't know if that's also linking to that idea that of where you're connected to Allah and where everything is connected is in its inner core, in its essence. Maybe, I don't know. I think there's something about how we are all individuals and we're here to experience Allah or God in our own ways. And like you said, if you are just following the societal norms, it's almost as if you're pushing down that inner voice down through other people's voices and not following your own path and your own experience of the divine. And I don't know, that's what maybe the Sufis have said when they're saying that, they have found the God within. It says more about their experience of God that's particular to every human being. Maybe.
It's, for me, totally makes sense when Allah is beyond any words to be summarized in or anything. So for everyone, he would be so unique as well.
Mm-hmm.
For everyone, like Allah is, it's impossible to put him into words. And how everyone will experience him, will experience some bits of his, greatness. And this is going to be unique, of course, because Allah is beyond our explanations. So for me, maybe I experience Allah in a certain way and I have a certain relationship with him. But for you and for Qasim or for everyone else, like it's a total different experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one thing which I've noticed, like when you go to do Umrah when you go to Makkah, there's a feeling that you feel over there. And I've felt that feeling, but I was never able to describe that feeling. I don't know if you have the same experience or not, but I've asked others as well about that feeling. Everyone has that one particular feeling, but no one's actually able to put it into words.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can understand what they felt, or it's even difficult for them to explain that feeling. So some things are beyond explanation and some things are very, very unique in experience. For me personally, I've had so many experiences where I've seen Allah himself, but happening in situations that this is by Allah. And you get to know that this is totally by Allah. That's no other way that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
You can call it a consequence, but I don't believe in consequences, first of all, but not consequences, but coincidences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like happens over and over again, and you get to know Allah every time. But yeah, that's my way.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like I'm sure I read somewhere that the idea of aql, it can mean knowledge in the way that we usually get it from our brain. But this idea of intuition, and intuition you can't touch. Intuition is something that's, like that thing that you can't describe. You just get a feeling. And I'm sure that can also be related to the term of aql. So it's like almost as if, yeah, we can know about God through studying the heavens and the earth and the science. But then there's the other
Hmm.
part that to make that aql, that kind of knowledge complete, so you have to have the intuition part. It has to mean something. And it's that intuition that something is behind it all. Something is directing it all. Something is, I don't want to say designing, but there's something that goes against the idea of accident and randomness. And I think that's where that intuition comes, but I think it's also that intuition that you can't, if you get to that idea of there being something, you stop there and you get this intuition, feeling that there's something, but again, you can't describe it. But
Hmm.
you know, it's not a kind of knowing here, it's a knowing in here, in your heart.
Here, yeah.
Yeah.
This just gives me this thought of, like when you're going somewhere, even if you're going for a fight or whatever, and if you have this confidence that Allah is behind you, that knowing itself is,
Mm,
you have no fear. You literally have no fear. That's what Allah says. Like Muslims don't, like Mu'min, they don't have fears because you know who's behind you, and this is something that you know. That's not like maybe, that's the conviction that you have. So every time there is a thought like this, my confidence just goes like skyrocket.
mhm.
You just know that who's behind you is like all powerful. No one can do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, what would you say, Carson? Do you think there's an element of intuition that can go beyond definitions?
Element of intuition that can go beyond definitions. 100%. Even I was telling Hamza before the call about the collective unconscious. Carl Jung talked about it. He said there's unconscious, there's conscious and there's unconscious, and there's deeper layer to that, like a collective unconscious that we are all part of. So I think a lot of like deeper intuition comes from that. And I don't believe in it. I feel like I've always felt that it exists and it operates in your life and also gives you information about certain things, um, and reveals stuff to you. Because I don't know, I don't want to even talk about this, but I think some people who have psychedelic experiences, they experience that side of the realm, and and I don't discredit the experiences people have through those substances. I think it definitely does open up part of your brain that sees the link between you and the infinite, and and the intuition is always a part of that. Let's say like two souls meeting, two people falling in love. That feels like such an intuition thing because it's so much trust. Like I feel like real love happens like very quick, and I think sometimes intuition plays a lot of part in it, and you just recognize that person. Oh, I knew you. How do I know you? And yeah, so I think we experience in our lives by just living how, like, if you fall in love with someone, you can see that this person, I knew them from before, you know, and I know this consciousness. Why do I resonate with this individual? It's like a simple human experience, but like I think a very profound human experience actually. But you can see the intuition part in it, and yeah, and
What about the collective unconscious?
yeah,
Would that possibly be a philosophical term of saying God?
exactly.
It's like you said, like most of us are on. Am I right in saying most of us operate in our day-to-day life on the conscious level,
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of going about the daily life. And then it's, because he was a psychoanalyst, he talks, they always talk about going inside, deeper
Yeah.
and deeper and deeper, passing through, like, like it, the Dr. Joseph Campbell, he says that, he read young and he wrote the book, The Hero with a Thousand,
Yeah. Thousand Faces or something.
something like that, wasn't it? Hero, and what he was saying, that basically all the stories that we teach ourselves, philosophical, religious, mythical, they all kind of basically have the same structure, and they all follow basically the same line. Part of that is where, the hero looks within themselves and draws something out in order to give them the courage to go on a journey. So I think probably what he was relating to, Joseph Campbell looking at that, relating to Jung, is that, going back to the idea of looking inwards and passing through the stages of the conscious to the unconscious to the collective unconscious, that ground of being again that we could call God, and tapping into that, and that's where revelation comes from, and that's where our connection with Allah is. But it's not something that anyone can do, and those who've accomplished it in its purest forms we call prophets or messengers. But they're just those people that have had that journey and found within themselves a oneness with all things, but not physical oneness, but a kind of,
Yeah.
we're all connected, but we're all connected in our own dependence, our own nothingness in the face of that absolute crown that we all rely on, that we call Allah or the collective unconscious or whatever.
Yeah.
I uh, I have a slightly different opinion. I totally agree, but I personally think like prophets were the ones who were chosen by Allah to be given this collective unconscious where they could, bring it to from unconscious to conscious level, let's say. But for us, there's a big difference between us and prophets that they were there by Allah to help us connect to Allah. And our test is not the test of prophets. Our test is very different, and it's to get to Allah. And the prophets were already with Allah, and they were like guiding us to Him. And that's why we have this collective unconscious, let's say, we're on we're all on the similar level, or let's say we're all in the same bracket. Someone is higher, someone is lower, and all we have to do is just get to what was in the scriptures, what was taught to us by the prophets, by Allah through prophets, let's say. This is my understanding.
Yeah.
For me, prophets were chosen. Like, let's say Jesus was born a prophet. I personally think Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu was born a prophet. Just he was told at the age of 40. He didn't have to reach within. He did, but it was pre-decided. It was predestined that Muhammad's gonna be there. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But yeah,
Because
So,
obviously, sorry, cousin.
no, go ahead, Craig, bhai. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, in terms of like the prophet, obviously there was a time when he wasn't the prophet, and the years spent meditating, so there was something going on there. And yeah, definitely, obviously, Allah chose, but then there's an interesting phrase in the Quran that Allah guides whom He wills. But interestingly, linguistically, it means that, but then it also means at the same time that He guides who wills to be guided. Linguistically, it means both. But usually translators, because they want to put the emphasis on Allah, they say that Allah guides those whom Allah wishes to guide. But in terms of this, the way the language works, it actually means also that, Allah only guides those who are themselves open to being guided. And they're not, exclusive concept. They're actually just saying the same thing. And I think that's where, Allah chose prophets because he knew that their maybe intention or their purity to find him was in its most raw form, purest form. That
Genuine.
that has them at a higher status, a higher rank. Not because they're like superhuman, but because they were the most human out of all human beings. Sorry, Cass, you were going to say something.
No, I was just thinking about like Hamza said, oh, they were chosen, but chosen by who? We come back to the same question, like who is choosing,
Allah.
and okay, but are you actually believing that because you were told, or you're believing that because you want to think like you cannot achieve that level of understanding because you think because maybe God considers you the same way, but you think that you cannot reach that level of understanding, because you have believed that idea, okay, I cannot understand the world like a prophet can, and maybe you can. Maybe you can have a better understanding because you are living in the 21st century, So it's
I feel like
that's
Tawheed's
how I think
getting
about it.
ticked up right now as we speak. Come on,
It's,
go.
it's, it's, it's gonna reach blasphemy fatwas. But
So
yeah, I totally get what Kasim is saying. But me personally, like this is very personal, and I have my personal, and I respect others, whatever they think. But for me, I don't think it's not even possible, even if I believe that I can qualify to a prophet's level. I I personally know for myself that I have to fight against my own self and make a better person out of me. And it's the way to make myself a better person is given to me, and what things I should be doing and what should things I shouldn't be doing. For me, the biggest fight is only that. I hope I can get to a better level than this as well, and may Allah make a use out of me for humanity, which is better. But the level of prophets is something which is for from my teachings, like whatever has been taught to me, let's say. Maybe it might sound like a conservative approach or whatever, but there is a seal of prophets for me.